and welcome to the Road to Genome podcast. This episode is being brought to you jointly by the Genomic Medicine Services in the North East and Yorkshire and the East of England. I'm your host, Helen Bethel, Genetic Counsellor and NEY Workforce Development and Education Lead. Today we come to you from inside of a busy department in the Leicester Royal Hospital, which is situated just outside the city of Leicester. I'm delighted to be joined by Rebecca Middleton, who is here to share with us her story as a patient and the journey which has led her to setting up the charity Hereditary Brain Aneurysm, or HBA, Support. So, hi Rebecca.
Hi.
Hi. Can I start by asking you to tell us a little bit about the personal journey that's led you to being a podcast interviewer today?
Well, I suppose my journey began when my mum died in 2009, a few days before her 60th birthday. I was living and working in Germany at the time, and I was very close to mum and used to, call her up at least twice a day. And I remember one particular day in May when I just couldn't get through. I'd had a busy but a really great day at work, and I was dying to share all the news with mum. Plus, we had to catch up on all the events details of we were planning for a party in a few weeks' time. So lots to kind of chat through and discuss, but couldn't get through. Thought, oh, that's a little bit odd. Went back to my apartment, and it was when my sister called a little while later to say something's happened to mum. She's collapsed. We're not sure what's happened, but get on the next flight home. And I suppose that was the moment that my journey began. Through the night, as I battled to get a flight home, we learnt that it wasn't a stroke, it was an aneurysm, and that she was being treated in intensive care, and we were told that it was touch and go. I eventually managed to get the first flight home the next day and just sped to the Leicester Royal Infirmary as quickly as we could. And then we were told by the intensive care consultant that unfortunately mum just wouldn't make it. So from the time of her collapse to the time that we eventually switched off her life support machine, it was under 24 hours. I was also told, sat in that little room here at the Leicester Royal Infirmary in the intensive care department, that don't worry, mum's aneurysm was nothing genetic, not hereditary, and she was probably born with it. So don't worry about it. Now, I hadn't really heard of this word aneurysm before, and obviously was dealing with a huge shock, an immense amount of grief, and just really trying to process what had happened within the last 12 hours, that I almost push that little bit of a conversation to the side. But I do keep returning to that conversation, and I have kept going back to that conversation as I realise now that those two facts that the intensive consultant described to me were actually both wrong. So at the time, we were now arranging mum's funeral rather than arranging mum's 60th birthday party. But life went on, and it was only then, a number of years later, that my uncle died of an aneurysm. And again, we were sat at home, and we got a phone call to say what had happened, and that my Uncle David had been taken into Nottingham Queen's Medical Centre because of a ruptured aneurysm. And we were like, oh my gosh, there's that word again. There's that aneurysm word. And I suppose then I also knew that was, if you like, the line in the sand, that this had to be more than a coincidence. And it was then at my uncle's funeral, he didn't make it. Again, another dash to a hospital, another dash to an intensive care department, and another final goodbye moment. And it was a week or so later at his funeral that myself and my sister and my cousins were sat round going, gosh, what, twice, does lightning really strike twice in the same family? When another uncle wandered by and said, well, you do realise, Rebecca, that your grandmother also died of an aneurysm. And, my blood ran cold. I was like, gosh, really? She died in the 60s. She was 34 at the time. She was 8 months pregnant at the time. So she died, her baby died. And it was such a shock for the family. And the story was that she died and it was something to do with preeclampsia. But as we know it now, because I tracked down her birth certificate, she died in Edinburgh, that it was a preeclampsia that raised blood pressure that caused the double aneurysm to burst as well. So yeah, going back to the funeral, we were like, really? What? And we were also aware that an aunt had died because of her aortic aneurysm repair going wrong. There was other members of the family who had some vascular symptoms that were worrying as well, that we were like, okay, stop. We need to look into this. This has to be more than a coincidence. And me being me, will put my hand up. I was like, right, I will go off to my GP. I will do some research, and I will try and find out what I can, and I will come back, and feedback to the family. So I went off to my GP, who kind of scratched his head and wasn't really quite sure what to do with me. Wasn't sure whether aneurysms could be hereditary or not. But what he did do, and what I'm grateful for, is that he referred me to a neurosurgeon, and he referred me into clinical genetics. So if we take the kind of the aneurysm path and the neurosurgery path, so I had done my research. I had learned that indeed aneurysms can run in family, and I took that information and I jotted down a sort of a rough family tree of where aneurysms had impacted my family so in such a devastating way, and took that to the neurosurgeon, and we had a sit down and the discussion. And after sort of much questioning and much questioning about, could I face the results? And if you were found to have an aneurysm, we could treat it, but depending where it is, we could watch and wait. So talking through all the possible different scenarios, that it was decided that I would undergo a brain scan. So a few weeks later, I did that. And then a few weeks after that, I remember distinctly, I was back in Germany on a sort of a cold and dark October day on a Friday evening. Always these things on a Friday evening. Yeah. How not, a lesson here on how not to deliver a result on a Friday evening in an email that confirmed that I too had an aneurysm. And yes, this was a familial aneurysm, and I had familial aneurysm syndrome. So there I was, again, a really tough weekend, because obviously desperately tried to get in touch with my neurosurgeon, who I think had sent that email and gone off on his weekend, and just, left me cold. And I had a young daughter at the time, and just trying to take it in. And I suppose, and I can look back now because I've had my aneurysm treated, and I'm sort of 10 years beyond that diagnosis. It'll be 10 years next month since I've had that diagnosis, that I suppose it was so hard to hear that news, because in my family, aneurysms meant death. I'd lost my grandmother, I'd lost my mother, I'd lost my uncle, I'd lost my aunt. Aneurysms could only end one way in my family, or so I thought. So it was found that the aneurysm actually was small, in quite a tricky place. So I was put what they call on a watch and wait regime, where I would undergo regular monitoring to see if the aneurysm grew, changed shape, and at that point they would decide whether it was the right time to treat. At the time, because it was small and in a tricky location, they decided the risks were just perhaps not in my favour, and the operation would be a little bit too risky compared to the risks of watching and waiting. So that is what happened, and that's what I did for sort of a number of years, when just after my 40th birthday, I'd had my regular scan and I got a phone call. You never want a phone call from your neurosurgeon. You want a letter from your neurosurgeon. Yeah. When you get a phone call, again, it's one of those moments that your blood runs cold and you're like, oh gosh. Rebecca, we've had your results in. Could you come and discuss them, please, as soon as you can? And again, not the telephone call you want to hear. So off I went to Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham, where my neurovascular specialist is and my neurosurgeon is based. And they said that it had grown, it had changed shape, therefore it was at a high risk of rupture. So the risk balance had shifted, and it was now the right time to treat. So 6 weeks later, I was there sort of being rolled into surgery, and I had my aneurysm coiled. So I have 3 coils in my brain and a stent in my brain as well. And I must say that the surgery went extremely well. I was out within 48 hours. I was back at work the next week. Lifetime of aspirin, and straight after was on some pretty mean blood thinners as well. But quite bruised, but actually all okay. So I was very, very grateful for the NHS for saving my life, but also very grateful that I'd actually changed and turned around my narrative. So in my family, aneurysms no longer meant death. It meant go in, get it fixed. Within 48 hours, you're walking out and having cuddles on the sofa and a cup of tea at home with your family, which was amazing. And did take me a little while to kind of let all of that sink in and to just kind of work through that. The narrative had changed and there was hope ahead. Genetically, so at the time of my diagnosis, I then went to the clinical genetics team here at Leicester Royal Infirmary, and remarkable timing, literally was just the start of the 100,000 Genomes project. So my consultant, Julian Barwell, who you'll be talking to very soon, did sort of the normal standard NHS screening which was available at the time, knowing full well that it wouldn't show anything up, but we had to go through that. So went through that, didn't show anything up, so then could be enrolled onto the 100,000 Genomes program. So December 2015, I gave my blood along with my dad as well, and our genome now sits in the National Genomics Research Libraries, and I am still waiting for a result. So, but I kind of fully expected that to be the case. Familial brain aneurysms are rare, thankfully, but also the genetics, what we know about brain aneurysms and what we know about familial brain aneurysms, it's just not there. We don't have the level of understanding to give me a diagnosis. So, they did the screen, they had a look, but I was not surprised that they couldn't find anything to explain this because, globally, nationally, we just don't have that understanding of brain aneurysms. So I am still awaiting my result. And I very much expect to be waiting a good number of years still for that result. But, my expectations were managed, and I put my genome in the National Genomics Research Library, knowing full well that it wouldn't help me, but in the hope that in a number of years' time, a decade or 2 decades' time, something would be discovered that eventually would help my daughters and my nieces and my cousins as well. So, very different kind of journeys that, in one respect, I'm very grateful to the NHS for taking really good care of me through my surgery. But I would say as well that I'm not out of the woods. So that's the thing with familial brain aneurysms. Once you have one, you're at risk of getting another. I am a woman, that's a risk factor. When you're postmenopausal, that's another risk factor. So I now undergo regular monitoring to make sure that the surgery and everything's okay in my brain, but also just to check for new friends, shall we say, as well. So every year I trot off and have a scan and sort of, then join the ride of the roller coaster of, the scan anxiety and waiting for the results. So it is a part of my life, and that worry is still a part of my life. But that immediate fear of living with an aneurysm, that luckily has gone. And very grateful for the surgery. And genetically, I'm awaiting those results.
Yeah. And I think, as somebody that's worked in clinical genetics, I recognise that, it's almost the rare scenario where we get a very clear-cut result in genetics. And so for you have your clinical diagnosis, but still awaiting that genetic diagnosis. How does it feel as a patient living with that uncertainty of waiting for that genetic diagnosis?
You're always living in hope. Hope is your currency. When you don't have a diagnosis, you are always hoping that tomorrow, next week, next year, there's going to be a clever scientist or researcher who will make a discovery. That hope has become more real as we learned through my charity HBA Support, Hereditary Brain Aneurysm Support, is now supporting a piece of research which is looking into the genetics of our condition. And it will, we hope, will be a major study and will be a world first study, and really once and for all get to the bottom and understand what is the genetic foundation of familial aneurysms, which we know impact thousands, millions across the world. So having a concrete research project actually looking into this has made a world of a difference. From kind of living in blind hope, we are now kind of going, right, okay, how do we make this happen? How can we support this research? How can we ensure that the patient voice is in this research so we can get to the concrete answers? And that's very exciting. That's really sort of elevated the hope that actually perhaps within my lifetime there will be answers. Again, won't help me, but I hope within my lifetime we will get to a point where my daughters don't have to undergo a lifetime of brain scans, that ultimately they can have a blood test to see if they are genetically at risk, and if they are, then they undergo the brain scans, and if they're not, off they go. So that is, as I say, incredibly exciting. And we are really grateful for Professor Diedrich Bulters, who's based at Southampton University, who's leading this research.
And is it just UK based, or is it taking people from international?
It's UK based. It's UK based, but it will have that kind of global impact, because once we know, we know. So yeah, he's working with an incredible team at Southampton, and he's working with all the neurocentres in the UK as well. So yeah, fantastic sort of reach across the UK, and really, really will be transformational.
It's incredible hearing you talk about both your diagnosis and your actions now, in terms of that uncertainty still exists. But what I'm hearing is that your focus has shifted to proactive rather than reactive. So like with your diagnosis, you spoke of how incredible you found it, that although you were having scans and screening, and although it didn't give you the result that you wanted to, that it did highlight there was something there. It shifted that focus into a more proactive management. And I guess a genetic diagnosis would potentially do that, as you described, for your children, whereas at the moment it would just be routine screening for all until you can identify those where it needs to be targeted at. But similarly with the research, it's shifting that focus of, rather than sitting and waiting for the National Research Library and the whole genome, the 100,000 genomes to come out with the result, it's really shifting it to that, going out and seeking it proactively to try and make those changes that will impact both for you and for other patients.
Absolutely. And for me, it's validating a whole community. You know, I went looking at 3am, looking at Dr. Google, as all the doctors tell you not to do, but inevitably every patient does, especially those with a rare condition, to try and find someone like me, to try and find another family who had been through our heartache. I knew that there was, but I couldn't connect with them. And I feel like the whole community, we haven't perhaps been validated as much as we should. We know that brain aneurysms in the UK affect 1.5 to 2 million people. We know that a percentage of those have a familial risk as well. So I know that I'm not alone. I know there is a big community out there. But also you question, because we are such a large community, you know, why has it taken so long for people to finally, once and for all, get a grip on what is happening genetically? Aneurysms are worrying, can drive anxiety within families, are devastating within families. And, you know, as I have suffered, you know, multiple tragedies within my family, but also, as I have proven, aneurysms can be fixed and repaired and cured, if you like. So we have a condition that we know has a genetic foundation, and we know actually with monitoring and treatment can be cured, but we haven't got the answers yet. There are not many conditions in the world that you can say, well, here's a community, here's a cure, but we haven't got the genetic foundation.
You haven't got the link.
So I'm, again, just so incredibly grateful for Professor Bulters, who kind of saw the craziness of this and go, right, let's once and for all crack this. Let's try and answer these questions and change the future of millions of families across the globe, potentially, that stops this tragedy going from generation to generation to generation, that more families have the opportunity to change the narrative within their families and survive, rather than having to undergo tragedy or life-changing impact of hemorrhage and aneurysm rupture.
Hi, my name's Naeem McCallachand, and I'm the host of Behind the Genes, Genomics England's podcast. Join us for the latest in cutting-edge research and real-life stories from people affected by rare conditions and cancer. Through thoughtful conversations, we'll take you behind the science. Plus, check out our Genomics 101 explainer episodes, where we break down complex genetic terms in under 10 minutes. Subscribe to Behind the Genes on your favourite podcast app today.
It's incredible to hear about the work that the charity that you mentioned, your Hereditary Brain Aneurysm charity, has done in pushing forward that research project. Can you tell us a little bit more about the charity and the work that you do?
I suppose my charity came from my own frustration. So when I did those 3M Google searches, when I tried to find somebody like me, and again, I knew there were people out there. I knew there were other families out there. I just couldn't connect with them. So there is the Brain Aneurysm Foundation in the US, which are fantastic, and we have a really good connection with them now. They are a significant charity. But I was like, there's no equivalent in the UK. And there were Facebook pages, but that's very much personal experience. But there was no, if you like, measured, fact-based information about this condition, about the risks, about the different pathways, and to give that kind of support and community and to somewhere where you could go and ask those questions and feel like you are not alone. So after my surgery, I vowed, right, this is the point. You know, I've undergone my surgery. I've survived. I've changed my narrative for my family. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it. So it was an idea that very much was sort of rolling around in my head. But at that point, when I sort of got home from the surgery, I was like, this is now. This is now. This is what we are doing right now. Yeah. So we established 2 years ago. And we have been growing ever since. So we started with our own piece of research. We did a targeted literature review because we wanted to know what was the landscape of brain aneurysms, what was the incidence and prevalence rates, what did we know about the genetics, which we know is very kind of patchy, and also what were the screening guidelines as well. And then we felt able that we could better support patients because we had that knowledge. And we have grown. We now produce patient guides, patient webinars. We have very active social media as well. We have emails every week from patients asking questions, going through their own challenging and difficult journeys and wanting some either reassurance or a signpost of, this has happened to me, where do I go? As well. So it's great that we can kind of start them off on their journey. And what we also say is every journey is different. Every family is different. So screening isn't for everybody. Within my family, once I got my diagnosis and shared it, some members of my family went off to get screened, which is fantastic. Others chose not to. Both are very, very valid decisions. Screening has to be a personal choice. So we ensure that all the information that we offer is non-biased and is displayed in a way that enables people to be informed but can make their own decisions based on their own circumstances and their own kind of appetite for risk and knowledge and knowing as well. And yeah, it's great. It's great that we now have sort of a dedicated team working for us. We have volunteers working for us. We've got our first bit of funding from the National Lottery, which is really exciting. It's really exciting, as I say, that we are supporting research as well. And it's really exciting that we are trying to build awareness of this condition. And again, sort of ensuring that our community has that validation, that they are worthy of support, they are worthy of research, and they should go and ask these difficult questions to their GPs, to their medical professionals. But also, we spent a lot of time trying to support our community of how they talk to their families, because we know that stories and patterns get lost within families and within generations, very much like mine. You know, my grandmother died in the 1960s. It was a tragic event. And almost, you know,
nobody joined the dots.
Nobody joined the dots. And it only, you know, it's only now when tragedy happens again, when history does repeat itself. And again, I feel it's a generational thing that our generation is more inclined to go, hang on, this is more than bad luck. There, you know, there has to be a genetic foundation here. So it's supporting those families who are going through that sort of journey of connecting the dots, putting the pieces of the jigsaw together, and also supporting the how. How do you talk to your family about this? There isn't, you know, there wasn't a guide out there, so we created a guide working with genetic counsellors to put together this guide of how do you talk to older generations about this? Could you tell me about, you know, Uncle so-and-so, was that a stroke or was that something else? And again, you know, very much within our family, how do you talk to the younger members of your family as well? How do you talk to children when tragedy has struck in families about, well, this has happened, but it could be this, and we need to find out a little bit more. And how do you take children through that journey as well? So it's, you know, it's a condition that affects multi-generations and every generation. So we've tried to put together a guide where patients can feel supported taking their families through this, because it's difficult. Families are beautiful, but families are complicated and messy, as we all know. So how do you do that? How do you connect those dots? And how what do you do with that information once you've got it? And where do you go next?
It's so lovely to hear your passion, Rebecca, about it. And I think, you know, we've carried out a few patient interviews now who, you know, you echo each other at all, kind of taking your passion for improving things for the future generations and for families around the world, and to unite your communities. It very much, you know, your words echo the others that we've interviewed, and it's amazing to see the work you are all doing to really drive that from such a personal place to make those 3 a.m. Google searches a less lonely place, so that when you Google it at 3 a.m, actually the first thing that comes up for many patients now will be your charity, and to know that actually there's a community here and I've got a way of reaching out to that community.
And that's what we hope, you know, those 3 a.m. Google searches with a cold cup of tea, they're a really hard and lonely place.
It is.
And if they can connect with us, and, you know, we get emails at 1 a.m, 2 a.m. through in our inbox. And I'm just so grateful that we can be there for them. We can be that hand that says, come on, you're not alone. Let's understand.
Look at this together.
Let's understand what you need, and we'll help you every step of the way.
Yeah, it's incredible. So can you tell me your professional background then, before you stepped into your charity role? Are you from a scientific background yourself, or is this all new for you?
Absolutely not. I scraped to C in science, and how I did that, I do not know. I've been on a huge, massive, steep learning curve. No, my background is communication, PR. I started as a journalist, a radio journalist, and then kind of switched to the other side, if you like. I moved over to PR, and then worked for a large energy company, shall we say, and then moved to Germany. Was working on international PR and communications. So sort of a really busy and an exciting role. But then, my journey very much changed when I moved back to the UK. I set up my own PR agency, which again was really, really exciting. But you know, as the great philosopher Taylor Swift once said, you can't chase after two rabbits. So I had to pick my rabbit. I couldn't dedicate all my energy into the company and at the same time build a charity. So I kind of picked the charity, which is now my life's work. But what's fantastic is okay, I'm not that great with the science and I really have to do my homework and read, the research studies again and again with my highlighter to try and pick out the relevant bits. But what I can do is, once I do understanding, is how do you explain that? How do you explain, all of this complicated science? And also, how do you explain really challenging, hard questions within families, and how do you explain those in a way and provide support in a way that can be understood no matter where anybody is. So I'm using those skills. I'm using those communication skills a lot within my role. But the science I need to constantly work out.
So in terms of when, I think you recalled it was at your uncle's funeral where the dots started to join themselves in terms of a potential genetic link here. Do you recall much from school about genetics, or was that really the first time that it kind of became relevant to you?
Yes. I kind of, very much scrabbled back into my mind for kind of the GCSE sort of section that we did on genetics and biology. But also, what I have understood from HBA, but also my other sort of patient participant roles as well, is actually the science doesn't matter. It's how you explain it and what the patient impact is. So yes, I could understand the genetics, and very much when we try and explain it, we explain it in a way that you don't really need to know about base pairs and you don't need to know about this or that molecule. What you need to know is what this means for me and what this could mean for my family going forward. So, sometimes not having that deep knowledge is actually an advantage. And we are very lucky that we have, people on our advisory board and on our trustees who do have that knowledge, and I can ping an email too. But it's trying to bring it up to a stage that we can communicate it on to our community.
Yeah. You mentioned it in terms of the context of your family. So your two daughters, you mentioned before, how have you handled the potential of a genetic diagnosis with them?
So they are aware, and they are aware that they might have to undergo brain scans. Obviously, it will be a choice for them. So what we do know about the natural history of brain aneurysms is that they do occur in adult life. It is extremely, very, very extremely rare for them to happen in childhood, which is a really good thing, but it happens as we become adults. And there are lots of schools of thought of when to introduce screening to young adults. And this is a question we get time and time again from sort of patients who are worried, obviously, about their children or younger members of their family as well. One school of thought is it should be 10 years previous to when the youngest person in the family has been impacted. So my grandmother died when she was 34, so that perhaps could mean that screening then starts for my daughters at 24. Others, because there isn't an official guideline here, you are dependent on what that neurosurgeon thinks, believes, their understanding and their experience as well. So we have heard from patients up and down the country different pieces of advice from sort of different neuro centres.
And I guess that's where the charity's got a real role, is bringing that community together to help them support the professionals in terms of guiding.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, patients talk to each other. They talk to each other on Facebook groups within our community. They talk to each other. So, for example, the NICE guidelines that you are eligible for screening if 2 or more of your first-degree relatives, which is your mum or a sibling or a child, is impacted by a brain aneurysm, whether it's a diagnosis or a rupture. Now, for me, it wasn't 2 first degrees. It was a first degree relative, which is my mum, but also a second degree relative, which is my grandmother. But because my neurosurgeon understood the pattern in our family and that there was just too much going on for this to be a coincidence, he recommended me for screening. And thank goodness he did, because he saved my life. That screening meant that my aneurysm was discovered, and eventually when that aneurysm became unstable and at risk of rupture, I got fixed. And we know that that's also the case up and down the country, that neurosurgeons don't necessarily stick to that advice. And we are supportive of that, because it is saving lives as well. So I mentioned the raw DNA. So raw stands for risk of aneurysm rupture, and the DNA project is looking at the genetic foundation. There's, if you like, a precursor to that, which is called just the raw study. And again, led by Professor Diedrich Bulters and his team at Southampton University, again, for the first time, looking at the natural history of the disease. So at the moment, neurosurgeons up and down the country base their advice on what's called a phases score, and it has five risk factors, which include smoking and blood pressure and age, but doesn't include family risk. Doesn't include the fact that you're a female. Now, we know brain aneurysms affect women more than men. Doesn't include whether you are pre or postmenopausal. Again, we know that if you're postmenopausal, your risks go up again. So we know that actually this model that is advice is based on, and prevention or surgical advice is based on, actually it needs updating. We need better data behind that, and we need a better model to support patients. So the RAW study is looking at the natural history of brain aneurysms, and hopefully will come to a better model of whether neurosurgeons should treat, watch, wait, whether screening should continue. So really understand what the risk factors are and what the natural history is. And they are doing that through looking at the medical records of 20,000 people in the UK today with ruptured aneurysms, and following them, this is so important, through their whole lifetime. Because again, research at the moment, the phases model at the moment is based on data from a sort of a 5-year period. I don't want to know what my risk score is in the next 5 years. I want to know what my risks are in the next decade or 2 decades. Hopefully I'm 46 now, I'm going to live a few more decades. How are we making these decisions on kind of future risk? So hopefully the RAW study, again, will fill in those gaps by looking at this amazing data and following people in the UK.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. And so there are obviously lots of professionals now that are in mainstream medicine that have never come across genomics, such as yourself, and are starting to introduce that into their pathways. What would you say to kind of mainstream clinicians that are maybe listening to this podcast that might be based in, neurology and might be coming across families such as your own? What advice would you give them, if you could, through this podcast?
I would say learn what you can to be useful to those families, because, genomics usually lives, if you like, within small circles, or within small pockets, if you like, here at the Leicester Royal. It doesn't. Genetics impacts so much disease and different diseases, and genetics can impact brain aneurysms as well. And I would also say there is a great role for genetic counsellors as well. Right at the start of this conversation, I said that my GP did 2 fantastic things, and that was one of them was to refer me to genetics, and I spoke to a genetic counsellor and could go through my family history and like you say, join the dots, see what those pieces of the puzzle meant. Because they really help me kind of see it clearly and understand where the links could be as well. And neurosurgeons and neurovascular specialists are, they are incredibly intelligent people, and they, hats off, and they save lives every single day. But it's a different skill set to take somebody through a family history, to have that time, to have that space, to work it out, and then to really understand what it means and what those implications are then for the rest of your family. So like dropping a stone in a pond, once you've done that, how does it reverberate out, and what do you do with that information? Because then you've got to share that information with family, and if you've got a great family who you speak to and get on well with, they'll be supportive. But what if that's not the case? How do you share that information? How do you speak to those different generations as well, who may have no or different understanding of genetics as well?
Yeah.
So understand what you can, understand that this is a genetic disease, understand that actually people will have questions. You know, our general awareness of genomics is increasing. You know, we see it on, you know, different soaps, and we read about it in the newspapers, on social channels as well. So we have an increasing knowledge of genomics and genetics. That may not be the correct perception versus reality and all of that, but take people's knowledge and then try and expand it in a way that is understandable, that we don't have to go on that, you know, base pair molecular level, that we can explain genomics in a way that makes sense for their family, and get genetics counsellors involved as well.
I hear what you're saying in terms of, you mentioned earlier in your interview about the fact that, you know, you don't need to understand the base pairs and the nucleotides and the very small detail. And I think it's similar for mainstream medicine. You know, I think there's a perception that genomics is, or genetics is, complicated, and that you have to understand it to the cellular level. And in reality, it's more the application that you need to understand more than the very detailed. And also your description of your experience with genetic counselling, because as a genetic counsellor myself, you know, it really is a privilege to have those slightly longer appointments than they might have in neurology, to actually sit and understand someone's history and help them find context in that, and help support them, as you say, in that journey of kind of advising relatives of their potential risk. Because that really is, you know, in my mind, where you really do get value for your money with genomics, is that in most areas of medicine, you might be dealing with the patient in front of you. Where genetics is different, is you do then do that 360 in the family, and, like you say, offer potential screening and management to relatives, which some may not choose to take up, but for where they do, as you've described, it can be hugely impactful. So yes,
and managing all those emotions as well that come up, you know, guilt. Oh gosh, you know, I felt a responsibility. It was my fault. I put my hand up. I said I'd go and do the research. But then when I went through the screening and I did the research, it's like, oh gosh, this is more than a coincidence. This is something in our family. And then that responsibility of sharing it out. And again, some members of my family were like, oh my gosh, Rebecca, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for this knowledge. Other members of my family literally slammed the door in my face and didn't want to engage. And again, every decision is personal, but again, it's that responsibility
of carrying that for your family.
Absolutely. And when you are also trying to manage a diagnosis and what that means, and that treatment pathway as well, that can sometimes be a lot and a big burden to carry. So genetic counsellors are just amazing at sharing that load and also helping you with ways of sharing that load.
Because you're not just only adjusting to carrying your own personal burden of your diagnosis and what that means for your immediate family, for your children, because I have no doubt that was rushing through your mind as you were receiving your own news of your aneurysm and going through your treatment. But then similarly carrying it then for your relatives, as you say, it's when you get a positive response from relatives, it can feel like you're shifting the burden, that they're taking that responsibility for themselves. So you can but when those people are not fully understanding it, and you, as you say, you're feeling that burden of, I've opened this can of worms, and they didn't want me to knock on that door that day, it almost resides with you, would you say?
Absolutely. You can never not unknow. It's that, you know, Pandora's box is open. And it's hard. You do carry that. But, you know, I had a responsibility to share this information. I had a responsibility what you then do with that information. But did I make the right choice that day? Did I not make the right choice that day? And it's something that I've, again, is bounced around in my mind many, many, many times. But I think I've come to the conclusion that I had to have that conversation because it's I was hopefully enabling them to make a choice onwards.
Even if it wasn't the choice you'd have made. Yeah.
But it is hard, and this is why genetic counsellors are so essential here, because this is not a linear, a linear straight, step-by-step pathway. This is one step forward, 5 steps back, and then we go to the left, then we go to the right, and then we start again. And that's where genetic counsellors play such a critical role in helping patients navigate that.
It's great to hear that they had such a positive impact in your pathway. But what would you say to either your younger self when this journey was all starting for you? If you could kind of reach out to her, or indeed another patient about to start on a similar journey, what bit of advice would you offer?
I suppose don't get gripped by the fear. Don't get gripped by the narrative or the historical narrative that there is hope out there. There is hope out there for surgical options, and hope out there for monitoring, hope out there for research right now. One piece of research and hopefully another piece of research to come with the genetics. That there is a horizon out there, and not to feel alone. Find that community and find that hope as well. And it's so easy for me to say that because I've been through this. My journey has been, my diagnosis was October 2014. I'm coming up to a 10-year anniversary of my diagnosis, and it's taken me 10 years to come to these conclusions. But that also drives me forward with HBA because I want to be that person who reaches out to me when I started my journey 10 years ago, and to be that hand to say, it's not all dark. There is light. There are treatment pathways. There are care pathways. There is support out there. And there are people like you out there. You are not alone. Don't do this alone. Find out what you can in a meaningful way. Get that support. Ask those difficult questions. You have every right to ask those difficult questions. And then take your time with how you choose to move forward, because the only right decision is your right decision.
That's great. And it's great that you are being part of that support and that hope for people on that similar journey to receiving that email on a Friday evening. It's amazing that you, as I said before, that you're putting your energies and your efforts into evolving that support network for patients such as yourself. We've talked lots about your charity role and about your personal journey. What other hats are you wearing at the moment?
Well, a hat I've just taken off.
Okay.
So when Julian Barwell recruited me onto the 100,000 Genomes project, he said, I think he maybe recognised something in me that I do like to ask challenging questions. He's like, Rebecca, you do know that they are establishing a participant panel at Genomics England? And I was like, really? What's one of them then? And what would I do? And he was like, yes, put yourself forward. I would definitely recommend you. So off I went, sort of April 2016, to my first participant panel. And it was PPI then. I was like, what's PPI? Isn't that some kind of insurance thing? And we established the participant panel, and myself and Gillian Hastings-Ward, who was the chair, I was the vice chair for rare conditions, and all the participant panel members helped establish what the panel is today, and that is that critical friend inside Genomics England, representing all the patients inside the National Genomics Research Library, and challenging Genomics England to go further for patients, to ensure that the patient voice is always at the centre of every decision that they make, and to strive to work closer with researchers and get the answers to questions that patients and participants want. So I stepped down from that role as good governance expects. So my time came to an end in the summer this year. But I'm incredibly proud that I got the opportunity to help establish the participant panel and make it what it is today. And it is now thriving and will continue to grow. And through that, I also became a member of the PPV panel, or the Patient Voice Panel, at the East GMSA.
Mm-hmm.
So I now sit on that. And yeah, very, very, again, proud to represent the patient voice there. Through my role of the participant panel at Genomics England, I also got heavily involved in the Generation study, which is a study that is looking to sequence 100,000 genomes of newborn babies to look for a number of rare conditions. So yeah, again, really exciting to see that project start as a public consultation to ask what people's views were. And now the project is starting to be delivered in hospitals up and down the country. So again, great to be part of that project, great to represent patients and parents, and again push for that project, for that research project to go further to support those patients and parents on that journey as well.
I love the way you described it as a critical friend.
Yes.
I really like that phrase. And as you say, it's so key that we have patient voices in the heart of so much of the work that we're doing to make sure that we're delivering this right and so that it sits right with patients. That's it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're all moving towards the same goal, but how we get to that goal,
until you have a lived experience,
absolutely.
I think we can only imagine what it is to go on those journeys. So to have people such as yourself, Rebecca, willing to share your experience is so valuable. So thinking about your various roles that you have, what does a good day look like for you?
A good day. Oh gosh. Well, I suppose I'm lucky to have lots of good days. The charity right now is just growing, and we are getting so much interest in what we are doing. So a good day would be connecting with kind of different stakeholders, trying to drive that awareness piece as well. A good day would be connecting with patients and supporting them directly or indirectly through our social channels. Again, putting together content that they need, putting together patient guides, putting together webinars so they can get to understand what's happening in the background as well. And probably just throw in an East GMSA PPV meeting as well for good measure. That would definitely be a good day. And I suppose a good day would always end with cuddles on the sofa with my kids.
Sounds fabulous. On the flip side, what's a challenging day for you?
A challenging day is when you really have to push to open those doors. When you send an email to say, look, could we connect? I think we might have something in common here, or I'd like to raise this with you. How can we improve this pathway? How can we, get this piece of information on the web, on an NHS website, or on this or this, so people can realize they're not alone and can better connect with other support, not just us, but there are other charities out there. And those doors just don't open. Those doors just remain shut, and you have to knock and knock and knock and knock again. What I've learned through HBA, but also as my role as a patient representative, is don't take no for an answer. You have to be tenacious. You have to keep going. And you have to just really just develop a tough skin, really. You just have to just keep on moving forward, even on those days when it feels like the NHS or the research world or whichever ecosystem world wants to push you back.
And what is it that drives you, particularly on those challenging days?
What drives me is that feeling right at the beginning when I thought I was alone, but I knew that I wasn't. And that kind of feeling that it's not fair. It's not fair that there's not awareness about this. It's not fair that I get to feel like this. It's not fair that the support isn't there for thousands of patients that so desperately need it. And it's that if you like, that injustice, that feeling of this needs to be better. This can be better. And again, with my background in communications, I kind of could see how it could be better. So that drives me on to kind of just change that. And it sounds so cliched of be the change you want to see, but every day I'm trying to be that organisation that I so desperately needed at 3 a.m. back on those lonely nights.
Well, Rebecca, it's been absolutely amazing to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing such a personal story with us. And also, it's been lovely to hear about all that amazing work that the charity's doing. I wish you all the success.
Thank you so
Good
much.
luck with the 10K.
Thank you. I need it.
Thanks for joining us today. If you would like more information about the topics that we have discussed, then you can find these at our website, www.ney-genomics.org/podcasts, where you'll also find all the episodes in our podcast series. These can also be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all other podcast platforms.